So I wanted to take a minute and talk about metal roofing. We get asked about metal roofs a lot. It's something that when folks are considering replacing their roof, that they definitely want to consider. It's also becoming more popular to see metal roofs installed on homes. We install a lot of metal roofing here at Property Revolution. And I just wanted to take a minute and talk about some of the pros and cons to using metal roofing and a few things to consider if you're going to look at a metal roofing project. So first things I want to go over, the major pros with metal. There's definitely a longer lifespan. There's metal roofs that have been on. Sometimes we remove them because they're finally worn out and outdated. Some of the metal roofs we remove are 60, 80, 100 years old. They can last a long time. So the lifespan is definitely a major factor. Metal roofing is also recyclable, and if you're concerned about the environment, if you're concerned about being responsible with resources, the metal roofing can be recycled and turned into something new, whereas shingles are removed from a roof and they're discarded in a landfill. As of yet, there's not a great process to recycle shingles, so there's definitely a big pro to recycling metal roofing. Another big pro with metal roofing is if you don't like the color, you can paint it. Painting shingles does not work well. I've had people ask me if it can be done. I don't recommend it. But metal can be painted. It can be cleaned, painted, and maintained a little bit in that way. And another factor with metal roofing is if an individual panel is damaged, say 20 years from now, one panel can easily be removed and replaced. With shingles, as the shingles age, it can start to become more difficult as they become brittle to repair or replace a small section of roofing. So those are definitely some of the pros, as well as durability. Over time, shingles will start to become brittle and can start to fail and come apart. If you get a big windstorm on an older shingle roof, you can see the roof will start to lose pieces of shingle. But with metal, it kind of maintains the same level of durability unless it gets rusted through. Some of the cons to consider with metal roofing. The big one is definitely the cost. The metal itself costs a bit more than the shingles would for a roof, and labor to install a metal roof correctly is definitely more time consuming. If you watch one of our crews install a shingle roof, we turn those projects around fairly quickly, and metal is definitely more tedious and time consuming, especially if the house is complicated or cut up, or there's lots of things, we call them penetrations, sticking through the roof. It can definitely be a much slower process. Metal roofing can be more difficult to maintain, especially earlier on. In the first few years, if something needs to be added to a shingle roof, say a skylight, or a furnace vent or something like that. Splicing in a couple of shingles when they're fairly fresh is a very simple process, but putting something through a metal roof and making sure it's flashed correctly and making sure it's going to shed water and be watertight, it can be a bit more difficult. One other con that many people don't think of that does affect some people, it doesn't always seem to be a factor, but some metal roofs can affect cell service. Seems to be more of a problem if the building is in like a lower spot, like say a valley. But it's something to consider. If you have poor cell reception at your house already, that metal roof could affect that. So definitely something to take into consideration. Another factor to consider, it can even be a pro, but sometimes it's a con, is the noise factor with a metal roof. So last night here it rained, and it was a nice soft rain, and a nice soft rain on a metal roof can be a really soothing sound, but a thunderstorm, pouring rain, or hail on a metal roof can be super noisy. So something to consider there as well if you have pets or kids and you're worried about them sleeping at night or worried about yourself sleeping, something to think about. The other thing that can come up at times after a metal roof's been installed for a little while, especially if you live in the country, is the metal can appear dirty looking a little bit quicker. the metal panels come with a clear finish on over the paint color, and dust and debris or pollen can stick to the roof and start to make it look just a little hazy fairly quickly. Typically, you would see that more with super light colors or super dark colors. The mid color tones don't show the dirtiness quite as quickly. So those are the pros and cons to kind of consider. Metal can definitely be a great thing to consider if you're going to be in your home for a long time. It's a more permanent solution. And definitely if you're concerned about recyclability and the environment, it can definitely be a responsible way to manage resources. So as we talk about metal, say you were going to have us come out to do an assessment for your home and discuss metal roofing, there's a few things that you would want to consider. One is there's basically two types of metal roofing. There's standing seam, which we can kind of show you a picture here of what that looks like. Standing seam is considered a hidden fastener system. So the first panel is installed, and then the fasteners are put in, and then each consecutive panel is installed, covering the fasteners of the previous panel. Much like vinyl siding would be installed, each panel locks together, and then the fasteners are covered. There are some exposed fasteners, depending on the exact system of standing seam, that may be visible in the trim pieces, but in general it is considered a hidden fastener system. What's really nice about that is it looks great. Also, the likelihood of it leaking because of the fasteners is very, very minimal, but standing seam metal is a bit more of an investment than the other type of metal that we're going to talk about. So standing seam metal is what is rated for residential application. The other type of metal that, at least here in West Michigan, you see frequently installed on homes is called corrugated. And we can show you a piece of that. In general, it looks like this. Usually there's like a rib every 9 inches, and they come in 3-foot panels. Corrugated steel is considered an agricultural panel, either for like pole barns or livestock housing. But oftentimes, like I said, around here, it's often installed on people's homes. The risks with installing a corrugated panel is the screws, the fasteners for this type of panel are installed through the surface of the panel. So when you look at a corrugated metal roof, you'll see all the screws. There's a lot of opinions on that, where the screws should be placed, how to maintain them. I don't really want to get into that right now. Some people say that every 10 years you need to give each screw a quarter turn. Long story short is there's a bit more maintenance involved with having a corrugated metal roof on your home. So another thing to consider is the type of installation with your metal roof. Again, here in West Michigan, you'll often see these corrugated metal roofs installed on the roof of a home, kind of like this. So say this is the slope of the roof. The installers will install wood purlins, usually 2 feet on center. They would be either 1x4s or 2x4s installed across the roof. And then the metal installed over that. There are a couple of concerns with installing your metal roof that way. Some people say that this provides an air gap. It can make the roof look a little more even, especially if the house is older and it's settled some. It can make the roof look a little more consistent. But the concerns with installing your metal roof in this way with purlins are the following. One, if something impacts your metal, hailstones, a tree branch, there's nothing in between those purlins supporting the metal. The metal is going to dent a lot easier. It's much more prone to being damaged. If you need to walk on the roof for maintenance, there's a space between each row of purlin, which gives it room to be bent or kinked or dented. And then the other factor is condensation. So if you think about if you go to you know, you go to McDonald's and you order a drink and you get a fountain drink and it's a hot, humid summer day. And you get a plastic cup. What does that plastic cup do? It condensates and you'll have that water running outside the cup. Or if you're sitting on your deck and you're drinking a can of pop and the can of pop is cold and the humid air collects on that and it condensates and runs down. So if you don't want your cup or your can to condensate, what do? You get a piece of styrofoam, a styrofoam cup or a koozie for the can, and then the condensation goes away. Well, metal roofing does the same thing. If you have a bare piece of metal and the temperature inside the building is cooler than outside the building and it's a humid day, the metal can condensate on the underside. And so by spanning the purlins with the metal, we have these spaces where there's bare metal in between the roof deck and the bottom side of the metal. Now there's a couple of ways to avoid this. One is to not install your roof with purlins and instead install the metal on an underlayment directly applied to the decking of the home. Or there are metals that have fiberglass applied to the bottom or a coating applied to the bottom to keep them from condensating. But if a plain metal panel is installed over purlins, there is a risk that those panels could condensate. Is that condensation going to cause a leak? Probably not. However, you are trapping moisture in between the metal panels and the sheeting on your home. Most people would not want water between what's protecting their roof and the layer underneath. So again, this is something to consider. If you're talking with a contractor and they're saying that they're going to install a metal roof with purlins, you want to make sure that there is some sort of barrier between the metal and the purlins to make sure that the underside of the metal is not going to condensate. But really what we recommend is just removing the shingles from the roof, installing proper underlayments, and attaching the metal panels to the sheeting itself. And we're going to demonstrate here in a few minutes why. The other thing to consider is whether or not the shingles underneath are removed. I've heard a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of different opinions out there. Today I'm going to state my opinion, and that is that the shingles should be removed. There are a number of contractors I've heard state to clients that the shingles provide extra insulation. I don't think you can build a strong case for that. If you take a package of shingles and you read the label, there's not going to be any R factor on there. And really overall, when it comes to insulating your home, your insulation should be here and your attic space should breathe. You don't need a layer of insulation here and a layer of insulation here. The big issue that can happen is if you leave the shingles on your roof, install these purlins, say the steel condensates, say it even leaks at some point, over time those shingles are going to continue to break down. And if you give it 10, 20, 30 years, those shingles are going to just dissolve into broken down crumbles as that metal heats up and expands and contracts the shingles underneath. And you're trapping a whole bunch of garbage under your nice new metal roof. It's not garbage now, but in a few years it's going to just disintegrate. Then you combine that with any condensation issues, or if there is a leak, that moisture can get trapped in there for some time. And a number of times in the past couple of years, I've been asked to look at leaking metal roofs that have been installed in that way and make repairs to them. And usually it's a pretty big disaster. There's usually a lot of trapped moisture that wasn't identified for an extended period of time because you have the shingle material combined with the space between the purlins and the metal. And it can just create room for a lot of headache and heartache down the road. So our recommendation when talking about metal roofing is to have the shingles removed. Again, proper underlayments installed, and then apply the metal directly to those underlayments. That's going to make the metal last longer. You're taking care of the condensation issue by having the vapor barrier right behind the metal itself. It's not going to condensate. And if a leak comes up, you're going to be able to identify it much more quickly. So those are my thoughts there. Again, there's lots of opinions. If this is something you want to talk about more, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to discuss and learn together. But these are definitely our recommendations on things to consider when you're thinking about a metal roof. So we're going to take a second here and do a little test. Below me, about, I don't know, 15, 16 feet, there's a steel panel. It's a 29 gauge corrugated metal panel spanning some purlins, approximately 2 feet apart. We just want to simulate what would happen if a hailstone were to hit the metal panel between the purlins. And then we're going to put that panel on a piece of OSB and then show what the difference is between the impact marks. So all testing by manufacturers for hail impacts is done with a 2-inch ball bearing. So we've got a couple of these here. We're gonna drop these. Like I said, my base is at about 15 feet. That testing is usually done from 20. So I'm gonna drop it from as high as I can hold it. And then we're just gonna compare and see what the difference is. So here goes the first one. Okay, so let's check this out, see how bad those are. See these divots here? This is where those balls hit. And this is essentially the same impact that large hailstones would cause. So now we want to see the difference between metal spanning over purlins and with support underneath. So I grabbed a quarter here so we can see the difference between the impact marks. So on top of the OSB, there's still a little dent there, but it's about half the size of a quarter. If we come over here, where the panel was not supported, you can see it actually creased this huge area. I don't know if that's showing up very well in the camera, but it's about probably 3 times the size difference between being supported and not supported.